So we've got 3 speakers this afternoon, and I will introduce each before each presentation. So our first presentation for you this afternoon is Creating Culture and Embedding Practice from Helen Ross and Maria Carnegie at Durham University Library and Collections. Helen is Assistant Director at Durham University Library and Collections and leads across areas including finance, HR, health and safety, EDI, partnerships and events, and cultural project management. And Maria is Head of Customer Services at Durham University Library and Collections, working across libraries and visitor attractions with a remit that includes building management, user experience, making spaces safe, inclusive and welcoming for everyone. So I'm going to invite Helen and Maria to share your presentation with us this afternoon. Thank you.
So what we wanted to do was run you through the last 2 years at Durham University, because we've had an awful lot of things going on, and it's really been the benefit of this cumulative activity that's been both institutional and departmental that has led to the changes, the activities and the positive things that we've been doing. And I think they've absolutely gone hand in glove. So there's a lot of kind of culture and practice and policy that has ended up impacting on the activities that we've done in the spaces. So just to run through some of the things that have been bubbling over the last 24 months, we obviously, as many institutions did, we had the REC activity, the Race Equality Charter, and the library was the lead on this project. So what this started to do was build structures, governance structures that started a lot of conversations in this space that led us to start thinking that there probably wasn't that space within the library structure itself to start talking about a lot of the issues that were coming up, not just from the REC, but from many other challenges around EDI. So that was sort of sitting in the back of our heads. At the same time, the institution appointed at a very senior level a PVC role that was just for EDI. I don't know whether we're the first one to do that. I'm sure there may be others around, but this was a very significant appointment for us. And having somebody at that level with that job title was a really positive statement. And it was things that started conversations around EDI and started that understanding of embedding it more in day-to-day activities and not being seen as something standalone. Shahid, who came in as our PVC EDI, also started to expand the institutional EDI team. And a main thrust of what they were then there to do was to put forward the institutional Athena Swan submission. We'd had a lot of departmental submissions into Athena Swan historically, and they'd been at bronze and silver, but what we wanted to do was put an institutional bid through to Athena Swan. And this started 18, 19 months ago, and we actually found out 2 weeks ago that we were awarded our silver. So that was a really rewarding process to be part of, albeit a very time-heavy and intensive one. Another activity that started to happen again through the institutional EDI team was an Inclusive Durham Festival. So this is a week-long event that happens every year where there are some sort of very big focused discussions and panel activities around some of the challenges we face around EDI as an institution, but also some much more fun and engaging activities that we have as well. The idea being to have an open forum where we start talking about some of the issues and challenges that we face. And then also what we had was the establishment of an EDI fund. Now, this is a very small pot of money that's a central pot that's held by the central EDI team. But what this is there to do is to provide small awards, £1,000 to £3,000, that will let people test stuff, try stuff, think about how they could do things in different ways and different approaches in the EDI world. And it just gives a little bit of seed money for us to start thinking about things and having resource to do things that we wouldn't have had before. And there was a panel established to make these awards, which wasn't the EDI team, it was representatives all across the university. So that's been going for about 18 months as well. And we're going to talk about one of the projects that we bid into. But going back to one of the first points I made is all this activity started us thinking in the Libraries and Collections department that we didn't really have a forum to discuss or think about the issues and challenges that arose through EDI, whether that was looking at space design, whether that was looking at culture and practice. So what we decided might be a good idea to do was to set up an EDI working group, places where we could have this kind of discussion, where we could share good practice, we could see what other institutions were doing, bring ideas back to when we've been to talks like this, and think about piloting new approaches and activities. And then this EDI fund allowed us the resource to tap into to do that, alongside allocating staff time. What we wanted this group to be was representative of the entire department. And we didn't want to go around tapping people on shoulders and the ones who always put themselves forward for things. So what we did was we did a couple of presentations to staff, and we had a couple of open workshop sessions where we talked about why we thought we needed this. We talked about what we were hoping to achieve with this, and we asked people to self-nominate. And we had no idea whether we get one person or multiple people putting forward, but we got a really good number putting themselves forward to be part of this group. It was absolutely fantastic. And we set the group up with, I think, 12 people on there, which we thought was a really good representation of the department. And that started about 15 months ago. And we actually meet as a group. We started meeting every 6 to 8 weeks, the idea being to keep things very regular and to get this as being a normal part of conversations. And then that was really at the heart of what we were wanting to do, along with all of the activities we wanted to kind of progress and champion. It was about normalizing those conversations around EDI and giving them a space where they could happen, rather than trying to bolt them onto other agendas and other meetings where they were always an AOB. So one of the first things we did as a group, we had been getting nudged towards doing Athena Swan as a department, and we would have been the first professional services department in our institution to do Athena Swan. We, however, weren't sure that Athena Swan was the right approach for us. So what we thought would be a much more useful process to go through was to take that first part of Athena Swan, for anybody who knows it, which is really that kind of detailed survey and giving people the chance to feed back. And rather than just do the focused activity that Athena Swan covers, we thought we'd take the opportunity to try and cover as much of the areas around EDI that we thought would be useful, and to put them into a cultural survey. So we took some advice from our EDI team. We took some advice from a great colleague at Northumbria University, who had been the first person in professional services to do an Athena Swan submission at their institution. And what we created was a survey template that all of our staff could fill in anonymously. There was quant and qual questions in there. And the idea was that this would give staff, for the first time, an opportunity to comment, to challenge, and to raise any issues, any observations, or any recommendations they had around the whole gamut of EDI. We analysed this with the central team and with the EDI working group, and we had a really high participation level for this, which was really incredible. We had, I think it was over 80% of our staff filled this in, so we felt really pleased that we had some really great data. And we shared all the data. So all the quant data was just constructed and shared with the staff. The thematic data was obviously sort of dusted and packaged in the qualitative data was packaged into thematic areas so we could share it with all staff. And what it threw up was 3 or 4 areas of interest that we probably wouldn't have known about if we hadn't gone through this process. Things that were really important to the staff, things that people were thinking about, worrying about, conscious of, and this gave them the room to rise to the top. So we were then able to start working with occupational health and HR. We started reviewing some of our induction processes based on this. So it gave us a really good understanding of those things that the staff were concerned about. And we did it the first time. We're going to do it again. We're going to do it every 24 months. We'll probably develop the question set a little bit, but the idea is then we've then got some benchmarking we can continue to go back to. So the EDI institutional fund that I mentioned, having this working group structure was brilliant, because people would come to that and say, look, I'm thinking of putting an application in, and they'd chat it through with the group, and it meant that the whole department was aware of what was going in and what work was happening. So if there were things that we could package together, it just made it much more holistic. And in the last year, we made 3 successful bids into this fund. We did something around a women's football exhibition, which we worked on with our sports science department. There's a link to that at the end of the presentation. We're doing some work around sensory support materials for our Museum of Archaeology. which is just starting off, and that's going to be a really great project because we've got some National Lottery Heritage Fund money to refurb that gallery as well, so this will align with that perfectly. But the main project that I was going to quickly talk about was the library sensory map project. So through this working group, we bring, if we hear interesting things about anything in the EDI space, we bring that information to the working group and have a conversation about it. And I can't remember who it was, but somebody brought to that group a report, and I think it might have been from the University of Bristol, that was indicating that approximately 10% of freshers had disclosed being neurodivergent during the application process. And what we knew from our EDI team is that disclosure levels are normally quite low. So if 10% are disclosing, there's a likelihood that there is a far greater number of people who are neurodivergent in any cohort in the university. So this made us think that this is a phenomenal number of people that coming into a space like a library, which is often the biggest space on campus. The Bill Bryson Library here in Durham, whether people know it or not, is a very complex building. It was a 60s build that had a massive extension. Some bits are very bright and glass, some bits are very dark and dingy. It's a complex building with lots of different spaces. So we thought a sensory mapping activity would be a really useful thing to do. And we'd heard about a local dance company who'd done some sensory mapping work, and they were really evangelical about it. I know other institutions have something similar. So it was a tool we thought would be really useful. So we got a group together that was kind of spun out of the working group, and additional people across the department came together. We looked at different tools that we could use, and we landed on Canva. But the real game changer for this was having this EDI fund money. And what we used this money to do was to employ students to work with us who had declared themselves neurodivergent. And they were working with us to do the assessment of the spaces. So spend time in the building, sitting in these spaces, observing them when they were busy, when they were quiet, during exam time, during normal term time. They helped us define the sensory foci, because we could have put lots of different things on this map, but what did we think were the most important things to put on this map? And crucially, they helped us with the design of the map, because we were going around in lots of different directions about how we should lay it out, what colours we should use. And actually, we ended up with an incredibly simple version of this. And this was very much led by their input and their shaping. So this map has been in use just since September, so we've only just rolled this out. We're hoping it has benefits to students, to staff, to visitors. We do a lot of visits from local schools, and we're hoping that we'll get some really positive feedback. We're going to monitor that over the coming weeks and months, and then we'll keep working on the map, see how we can improve it. And we've also had some expressions of interest from other university service areas who have kind of heard about this, or off their own back were interested in doing something. So student wellbeing, colleges and summer schools have all said they're interested in doing sensory maps. What's great is that they're coming to us and ask what we did, can they learn from us? And crucially, can we keep a level of consistency in how we're laying these out in the use of icons and the use of design? So hopefully we'll see other parts of the institution start using these for their students as well. Finally, just, from all the work that we've been doing, what we've started doing is a lot of very specific training opportunities and providing opportunities for people to go to monthly drop-ins. Some of the things that were coming through is people had concerns or things they wanted to talk about in the EDI space, but maybe felt a little uncomfortable or didn't know how to ask, or didn't know whether there was a way they needed to ask. So we started doing HR and EDI drop-ins for the staff. So once a month, a member of those two teams will be in a space in the library, in a private space. And if people have things they want to ask and talk about, they can. Another thing that we're just about to embark on is the EIA training and support sessions. So normally when you're thinking about any builds or any design, the quality impact assessment often is an afterthought rather than a forethought. So we're doing some training and support with the central EDI team to train a cohort of our staff so they can be champions for this. So whenever we're embarking on any project of any size or scale, whether it's a rebuild or looking at a project, we're looking at that from day one, and they're going to act as champions across the department to help embed that in the culture. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Maria.
Thank you, Helen. So I'm going to start off talking about Durham Enable, which is a local organisation and they work to get people who have some barriers into long-term paid work. They particularly work with people with different mental health, disability, neurodivergence, long-term health issues. And this is a very new initiative for us. In fact, it's due to start at the end of this week, so quite excited at the moment. But Durham Enable, we're really keen to work with the university in a partnership model. And they provide a fully supported and funded internship where a student works within a team in a very real work environment. Initially a day a week, but increasing to 3 days over 9 months. They come with a job coach, so the student is very much supported. As they currently have a student who is really keen to work in libraries, they also approached me directly about this, and we were very up for this and decided to act as a bit of a pilot for the university. I have to say, our HR department have been brilliant about supporting getting the contract in place, the legal side of it and the frameworks around it. And I know I've got a really inclusive team to welcome this student into. I'm hoping that we will be able to provide a meaningful and valuable opportunity to the student. It should open up doors for additional internships within the university, but I'm also hoping it will give us some learning as well, particularly on developing inclusive job roles around different recruitment practices where we already do some really good work, but there's always new things to learn. But also helping to make our workspaces as well as our learning spaces more inclusive. So moving on to the next slide. So this is just to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're already doing in the library as a space. So over the last 4 or 5 years, we've broadened the range of equipment and facilities we have within the library for students. So we have disability support rooms, which I know a lot of you will have these. These are only available to students who have disability support plans. They pre-book them. They provide them with a quiet space, a good size space. If they need to bring a support worker with them, they can. And they obviously have different sort of accessible furniture and equipment and software and so on in the rooms. In terms of the equipment that students can borrow, these are available to any student. You don't have to have a support plan for it. And I've just listed a few of the examples there. When we started expanding this range, it led to a really good conversation about providing similar equipment for our staff to use in the workrooms, or even if they wanted to take them into meetings. So as an example, we bought additional ear defenders for staff to use, and they're just kept in the workroom for anybody to pick up as they wish. The snug is our kind of well-being space. It's kind of a relaxed space, somewhere for students to go to. If they want to study in there, they can, but they don't have to. They can chill out a little bit in there. The team carried out a lot of different user experience activity to help inform developments in that space. So the students have informed sort of the look and the feel of it. We've got things in there like bean bags. We've got lots of books on crafting, hobbies, well-being, fiction. We also provide crafting materials, so things like wool and crochet hooks. There's colouring in there, there's games, there's jigsaws. There's a really cool Christmas jigsaw out at the moment. The space is kind of a nice feel of being enclosed and open. We've got very few guidelines on how students use it, so we let the students sort of self-determine. We would obviously step in if there was anything disruptive or anything that was excluding people. And because we've been able to create partition walling within it, all very temporary and movable, that there's lots of different areas and corners, so students can come in small groups or individually find a corner. And we find it is popular and well used and does provide a very different feel for students. Things like Chat With Us is an opportunity for students to very informally sit down, have a cup of tea, have a cup of coffee, hot chocolate, biscuits with a couple of members of library staff. And if they want to talk about the library, if they've got any questions, but if they just want to chat, they can do that as well. And we run that on a sort of fortnightly basis, and it's just really easy, really low key, but we get some really nice, good quality conversations there. And I hope it's a way of kind of humanising the library as well. And we provide bespoke library inductions for students with support plans. So these take place before the start of the academic year. so we can provide a very supported induction, and any student with a disability support plan can have an individual one-on-one session if they need it. So finally, at the end of last academic year, for a whole host of reasons that I won't go into, we carried out a study space habits survey, which was part of a broader piece of work. We really wanted to try and understand where and when students prefer to study, but most importantly, why? Why the where, why the when? So to achieve this in the survey, we had a lot of different open comment boxes. We wanted to try to avoid imposing our preconceptions or our terminology or our expectations on students. So while we didn't specifically ask about EDI or accessibility or belonging, we hoped students would find lots of opportunity to talk about this if it was important to them. And they did, in lots of different ways. They did talk about the feel of the space, as well as sort of the general equipment that was in it. And students shared some quite personal experiences. And I feel that their individual experiences relating to mental health, anxiety, well-being came through in some of the comments in a way I don't think they would have done if we had provided tick boxes. And I've just popped a couple on the screen there for you to have a look and a read through. And I think that they're almost quite emotive, but they do sort of maybe give you a real feel for what students are thinking sometimes and how our spaces can interact with students in a way that we maybe don't think about initially. Now, we're at the very early stage of this. We haven't sort of specifically put things in action from this. So we're still exploring how to use the information, but it is going to inform future development and provision of study space, both in the library, but also in the wider university. And it's going to be really exciting taking those conversations into the wider university, because again, I think it's going to surprise some people and hopefully help make them think. And I think that's it. If these kind of comments and this kind of storytelling helps us think in a slightly different way, it will help us improve the inclusivity in our study spaces. And I think, Helen, that wraps us up.
And I'm aware we've talked about a huge array of things, and what we want to do was tell the story of what we've been doing. But if anything there, anybody wants to know more about in particular, we can circulate our contact details. I'd be very happy to talk to anybody who had any specific questions about any of the things we've talked about.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Helen and Maria. Really appreciate it. And if you've got any questions for Helen and Maria at the discussion section of today, please do pop them in the Q&A. So we're going to introduce our second speaker this afternoon, who is Sophie Wonnacott, who will be speaking about belonging by design, belonging EDI in Exeter Library Spaces. Sophie is Library Services Manager at the University of Exeter and has experience from a wide range of management and leadership roles across education, hospitality and retail sectors. So over to you, Sophie.
Okay, so as you said, I'm Sophie Wonnacott. I'm Library Service Manager at the University of Exeter. So what does that mean for the purposes of this conversation this afternoon and this talk this afternoon? I largely manage our physical spaces, digital spaces, and work closely across the university with our estates teams and digital teams, because I'm also responsible for managing our other central study spaces at Exeter. So I'm going to give fair warning that over the course of this talk, you may hear the words partnership and collaboration a few times, and I apologise for that. With that in mind, I'm going to be talking to you through some of the changes to space we've made over the last couple of years, and just to talk about our aim at Exeter is for all members of our community to feel that they belong in our spaces when they enter them. So I just want to be really clear that as I move through the changes that we've made over the last couple of years, and the changes that we've got coming, that they are purposeful, they are by design. So, you know, I did choose this title consciously, if you like. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking you through some of the recent space projects that we've undertaken. Earlier this year, we reopened our smaller library, which is St Luke's Library. after a fairly ambitious refit, I would say. It's homes mainly medical school and education collections, therefore used by quite a number of postgraduates. And we wanted to ensure that the needs of all of our users were met. And we worked really closely with the estates team on this project. And by doing this, we doubled the capacity in the building, but also made sure that we thought about diversity and inclusion in all of the decision making around that space. We brought in an independent design team, and that really gave us some learning from other industries and different ways of thinking. And that was really useful, I think. I think there was a little bit of hesitation around that to start with, but actually that worked really well. The pods that you can see in the image here were selected to allow for a wheelchair to sit comfortably at all the pods, so they run right through the ground floor. And it still maintains a level of privacy so that we can still have that sort of quieter, or that I can work with my peers and not feel separate. And this is my space over here. We wanted it to be a space for everybody. This library is already the home to our research pod, our safe pod. And it's already a 24/7 building. So adding a kitchen space was a no-brainer, and hot water, microwaves and all of those things were added. And again, in the kitchen space, we really thought about, making sure that we had multiple levels of microwave, hot water and all of those things. We did all the normal things that you would expect. We did the sit-stand desks, and we ensured that we had all gender bathrooms. So, like I say, really thinking about the entire space being the place where our users wanted to be. So moving on to Forum Library, we've just completed quite a bit of work at Forum Library, but in lots of little pockets. So we ran quite a large UX project, I'm going to call it a project, on work pods. We worked in partnership with our suppliers. I managed to persuade them to give us pods to trial one at a time. Our students then were able to use them and give feedback on them. And we settled on which pods we wanted to purchase and which ones we wanted to put place in our spaces off the back of our student engagement and of working with our suppliers. You can see here in this image here, this was one of my favourite choices that was made by our students. So it is completely flush to the floor. You can see there is a chair in it at the moment, but we do try and move that away every day so that it is completely fully accessible. There is no step up into it. You can also see here that we are deliberately using a reduced colour palette to support neurodiversity. So we're toning down that colour. I think in our previous talk, we talked about some areas of library having quite loud colours from bygone eras, and Forum Library is certainly one of those. It's got some very loud colours in it. So we're staying with the sort of colours that are in place. They help with our zoning, and I'll talk to you about that in a moment, but just toning it down. So I'll talk to you about the zoning. I mean, many of us do this, but we zone our libraries into sort of silent, quiet and group study by floor. That's massively popular with our students and users, and they really appreciate that space. We too have accessibility rooms that are usable by students who have individual learning plans in place and specific equipment in those spaces. Recently, we have worked with the exams team to convert one of our silent study rooms to double up as an exam space. So some of our students who require ILPs may need a separate exam space. They don't necessarily need to be on their own. So it might just be that we want to be in a room of 15 rather than a room of 200. So we have converted a silent study space that during exam period will flip and be used for exams. So we are trialing that in January. The space is now ready. anyone that would like to talk to me about that once we've actually used it and practiced it, and put it into practice, please do get in touch. That was a really interesting conversation with exams, having to think about invigilation and all of those sorts of things as well. Okay. Just wanted to pick up our partnership with Food Save. So Food Save is a CIC organisation, and I always forget what that stands for, but I'll come to that in a moment. They are independent of the university, and they're very much this is very much a partnership. They have a fridge in both of our libraries. They collect food and they deliver it to the fridges in our libraries, and the entire community is welcome to come and help themselves to the food from our libraries. And while this is sort of touching on well-being, and I do think it really gives a sense of belonging to the entire community. And when I say entire, we are open to the public, so anybody, student, staff, researcher, member of the public, anybody can come and help themselves to some food from that fridge. It takes away a feeling of I shouldn't be doing this, or people are watching me. It's become very much the norm that people check out the fridge and see if there's, I don't know, a box of tea bags in there, or a Pret sandwich, or whatever it might be. Other sandwiches are available. Yeah, I really wanted to highlight this. The second fridge opened last month at St Luke's Library, so I'm really pleased about that. We do collaborative marketing, so the marketing does go outside of the university as well as internally, and we support them in finding volunteers. So we as in the university and the library have very little to do with the actual day-to-day running of the fridge, but we do help to promote that Food Save as an organisation to look for volunteers within the university, and we have huge amounts of students who volunteer for this, and staff actually. So yeah, really worth getting involved with partnering organisations to support with that sort of thing. Help desks. Apologies for the photo. I was very upset that I didn't have a better photo of our help desks. But there's a few things I wanted to point out here. We're looking after our customers and we're looking after our teams. We talked about creating better workspaces for our teams, but also better spaces to support our customers. All of our help desks now have individually sit-stand desks. So it's not a case of I walk in, I enter one of our library spaces and I have to go to this help desk or that help desk. I can go to wherever I need to. Also, by making them individually sit-stand, it supports the well-being of our own team. I've found that it also means that my team is more engaged with our customer. A lot of my team choose to have it at a standing level, or and they're just more engaged just by being much more comfortable at the desk. So there's that. I also wanted to point out the Ask Us. So we have rebranded our service to be called Ask Us. We wanted to be more open. We didn't want to be known as the help desk. This is a place where you come if you need help. Is great, but we wanted to go beyond that. We wanted to be a place where you can actively come and talk to us. So Ask Us is the name that we call our frontline services. And also our help desk are now shared spaces. So we have designed all of our help desks with an extra desk that we don't actually need. And we invite other services to come along to the library and have pop-up help desks. Now, these services may or may not have their own help desks elsewhere at the university. Library space is generally quite central, and most of them have sort of really jumped at the chance to be in those spaces. And I think in terms of EDI, it really helps our students for only having that central, that one point that they have to come to. They don't feel like they're having to wander around and look for different places. It's not confusing. It's a much cleaner message. So this is the bit that I really wanted to talk about today. So how do we do it? And it's actually the slide with the least amount on it, as you can see. Yeah, stakeholder engagement. You can see a picture there of fairly traditional stakeholder engagement. I think that's me doing some, we're talking there about finishes in St Luke's Library. I think what's really important with the stakeholder engagement is understanding the detail and really understanding what our users need in our library spaces. I spent a week actually on this stand that you're looking at now. And I know a lot of people might think, oh, a week's, you know, an awfully long time. I spoke to hundreds and hundreds of students, staff, visitors, to really understand how they needed to use our spaces, what sort of feel they wanted from the spaces. So you can't really see it here, or you might see it at the bottom of the screen there. There's red and green stickers there. Red was an absolute no. I discovered that nobody wants anything orange. Nobody wants orange ever again at the University of Exeter. So orange palettes went out the window because they didn't feel comfortable in them. So yes, and then we really got to understand things around why I need a PC. Actually, I don't need a PC, I need a screen. And it's those sorts of things that can really support our students in our spaces. Okay. We also run campus tours. So I should reword that. So I took a campus tour that was run by the Neurodiversity Society. So they very much led the tour and took me on a tour of our study spaces and some of our teaching spaces. I organised for quite a lot of staff members to come on that tour, and it is still feeding into much of the decision making that's happening, not just with library and study spaces, but actually now in teaching spaces, outdoor spaces. We took grounds team, maintenance, estate design, all sorts of areas of the university, digital, all came along on that physical tour. So that was a really useful tour to do. And obviously we undertake regular UX activities at the desk and in our spaces. I am predominantly physical space, but I did want to just touch on our collections because my team do an awful lot of work. They're matrix managed and they do an incredible amount of work in our collections. And while, so in addition to sort of standard wellbeing collections, they've worked with societies and individual requests in response to feedback, and also with other university teams to develop a range of reading lists. They include things such as Chinese language fiction books. They have a banned book list, Gypsy, Roma and Traveller History Month lists. Just to name a few, I know that there is a Ukrainian poetry translation list. So really wanted to highlight the work that's going on there. And again, it's about collaboratively working with the Students' Guild and the communications teams to promote these, to work on these, to make ourselves fully available to everybody. So community engagement. When we're designing spaces, going back to that, having to really understand the detail, it's really important that we understand what we want to do in these spaces before we start thinking, oh, that's a really nice space to put this table in, or whatever that might be. So we really need to look at the activities that need to happen within them. And sometimes I do find myself going against the grain in the wider organisation, wanting to look at the detail first. I was in a meeting just last week where I sort of had to say, well, no, the detail is really important and I need to understand why you want to build a room there before we build a room there. So we knew that we wanted to provide spaces to run drop-in sessions. So this is one of the drop-in sessions you can see here. This is actually a research cafe in full swing. That is Lee Snook, our wonderful law librarian, who is leading on that research cafe. We also run English language development program cafes, and they drop in and they come along. For me, that's a really important one because historically they happened in the Into building, and we know that there is some stigma for some of our international students that don't want to use that building. They want to feel more that they belong in the university buildings now that they are in sessional, not pre-sessional. So we know from working with that team that attendance at those sessions has massively increased by having those sessions within the library spaces. So I think that's a really, really important one to highlight. You can see there the chaplaincy have run various drop-ins in our spaces. Students Guild choose to come down, although they've both got their own spaces. Again, the library is becoming a central hub for everyone to feel included and that they belong. We are open to any student society to book. I'm pretty much open to anything, as long as it's, you know, within the parameters of their society events. I just wanted to pick up on jigsaws for charities. So we have constantly got a jigsaw table out now, unbelievably popular with our students. We actually collect the jigsaws from a local charity in the city centre. The students do the jigsaw puzzles, and then if they are complete and don't have anything missing, they then get sold in the charity shop. So there's a really nice community piece going there and starting to get that sense of belonging of within the city as well. You know, we belong in Exeter, not just in the university. So I think that's great. Library champions, always been a massive thing at Exeter. Off the back of off the back of 2 years ago, library champions, we have introduced fidget toys and coloured overlays. Again, massively popular. The fidget toys go missing. Yes, they do, as do the coloured overlays. I think it's the commitment you need to make. I think you just need to say, okay, we're going to accept that they go missing and we're going to replace them. I think the value it gives to students who need them is huge. I also think that there are more students using them than have declared. So completely agree that that this goes beyond the students that are declaring that they need these items. And then finally, what next? Currently working on a lift at St Luke's Library because the building is quite old and it definitely needs a new lift in place. We'll be working with our students on the outcomes of the current Library Champions project because there is a specific project looking at neurodiversity in library spaces. Will be further development of our physical spaces. That's just an ongoing programme with our estates team. We'll be focusing on the digital and looking at our digital spaces and working to align heritage collections more closely with our central library spaces. Okay, I think that's me.
Thank you so much, Sophie. There was an awful lot packed in there, so I think everyone's brains will be whirring. Thank you. So I will introduce our final speaker for this afternoon, who is Tom Radley. Tom is DEI and Engagement Coordinator at the National Archives and RLUK and TNA Professional Fellow for 2024-25. Tom will talk us through the background research and results of his fellowship, and his presentation is titled Neurodiversity and Document Storage, It's the Little Things That Matter. So Tom, I'd like to hand over to you, please.
Thank you very much. So I need to apologise for the lack of slides. I have ADHD, so my actual day job got a bit ahead of me for today, so I do apologise for that. But so I'm just going to talk you through my fellowship, how it came about, and how I worked on it, and what the results were. It centres around neurodiversity document storage, and why that's important. These days, I work behind a desk doing internal comms and inclusion work, mostly admin. I answer emails. I set up and run various forums here at the National Archives. But prior to that, I worked for 11 years in our Document Services Department, which I'm going to refer to as DSD from now on because civil servant acronyms important. DSD have the responsibility of safely storing and transporting the 25 million documents that make up the National Archives collection. I love my job. I wouldn't have done it for 11 years if I didn't. But I often came home utterly exhausted, and I mean that genuinely exhausted, not just tired, but completely exhausted. Many people do. I hear you say this, but not like this. It was exhaustion to the core, borderline burnout. Um, I often wondered why. What makes me different to everyone else? It occurred to me that, oh, yeah, I'm neurodivergent. I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and dyspraxia. Um, Having come to this realization, I spoke to several of my other neurodivergent colleagues. DSD has a large number of autistic and ADHD members of staff, and it transpires that they also regularly experience being tired and worn out at the end of the day, on a far more frequent occurrence than our other neurotypical colleagues. I wanted to work out why, and it was a fairly straightforward leap from there to begin considering the immediate environment. The 9 repository spaces at TNA are climatically and environmentally controlled, designed to keep out natural light, sparsely populated by people, and each of them is roughly the size of 2 football pitches. I began to wonder if the unique circumstances and environmental conditions in these spaces had in any way affected us. I mulled over applying for the RLUK TNA Fellowship, which is a fully funded research fellowship embedded within archival or library practice, that's designed to produce a practice-based outcome at the end of it. 2 of my colleagues, Rosalind Morris of our education department and Vicky Kolkowski-Broad of our collections expertise and engagement department, had already completed theirs and encouraged me to take the questions I had forward into a fellowship, using the information they supplied and my own question. I went about filling out the application form with no expectation of getting the fellowship. Not from a research background. I have a degree, but the last time I did any serious research was at this point 14 years previously. I was also very nervous. This is way out of DSD's normal remit, and I had to get permission from both my line manager and my head of department to make space for it. But clearly they saw value in my project. They allowed me to do it, and I was lucky enough to be selected to participate in the scheme. I was even more lucky to be paired up as my mentor with Alison Stevenson, one of the directors of the National Library of Scotland. And then I went away, spoke with her to set about answering the questions at the heart of my project. Firstly, I had to define neurodiversity, and establish what, if anything, the impact of the environment in document storage spaces is on neurodivergent users, and what, if anything, the impact of handling those documents has on them. The first question was relatively straightforward. As most people here will know, the term neurodiversity was coined by Judy Singer in the late 90s. It refers to the idea that all populations are neurologically diverse, and the 2 primary groups of people are the neurotypical, those that sit within the middle of the spectrum and are the typical presentation of neurotypes, and those that sit either end of the spectrum, who are described as neurodivergent. This doesn't mean there's anything wrong with neurodivergent people, just that they experience the world differently. When considering neurodivergent people, associated conditions are ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and Tourette's as a beginning point. Having established this, I needed to determine how to study the effects of the environment and document handling on archival and library staff. From my own experience and from the conversations I had with my colleagues who are part of TNA's Neurodiversity Network, I determined that there are 3 main areas that might affect a neurodivergent person's ability to work in repository environments: direct line management and general management culture, the environment, and the documents themselves. I chose to focus on the sensory elements of the environment and the documents, as these elements I could more directly have an impact on. And also, management culture is an entire project within itself, and I just didn't have the time and space to be looking at that. I visited the National Library of Scotland, met with several members of their team, and got to learn how they do things. I was welcomed with open arms and a level of warmth that I really wasn't expecting, but made my work so much easier and more fun to do. Whilst I was there, I visited all three of their sites: George IV Bridge, Causeway Side in Edinburgh, and the National Film Archive in Kelvinhall, Glasgow. I got tours around all three sites, was given an office to make notes and keep track of observations. I was shown how productions are made and delivered to the reading rooms, and finally how their reading rooms work. This gave me a really good insight into the differences between archival and library storage, and the similarities for that matter, as well as the fact that not all archives are as well catalogued and set up as TNA, which might further affect a person's ability to work in those spaces. On my return to TNA, I arranged a sensory tour of the repositories with the Neurodiversity Network. I asked people to explore how they felt in several areas of the repository spaces and considered any mental, emotional, or physical impact it had on them. Some of these people had already worked in repository spaces and others had never been in them before, which gave me some very interesting perspectives. It's also interesting to note that this started off as quite a difficult process. Neurodivergent people are not always very good at introspection, and I was asking people to be introspective, but we got there in the end. It was a very powerful, very useful day for a lot of people, I think. Using the information I gathered from my trip to Scotland and my own tour, I wrote a guide to how to do sensory tours and worked with our customer insight team to develop a survey based on this. This was then distributed to the people I'd taken around TNA spaces, and then to the entire archive sector, as well as to the National Library of Scotland. I got 25 responses in total, which, when you consider that roughly only 5% of the population in general is neurodivergent, I'm pretty happy with. The responses were varied, but most people seem to be relatively comfortable in spaces, but there were things that were difficult for them, such as poor air quality, odd lighting situations, narrow aisles, and just the general temperature in some spaces. I still personally adore a quote I received, which was that that archival stacks is one particular person's happy space, showing that while these spaces can be uncomfortable for people, they are a space of much joy. And if there is something that I miss from working in the repositories, it is that sense of the weight of history on your shoulders. I then moved on to establishing the effects that documents themselves have on people. To do this, I set up a document display for members of staff at TNA. This was made up of a variety of documents in a variety of states of preservation. This ranged from military logbooks that smelled of whale vomit, coal dust covered parchment, to modern paper covered in stringy cotton fibers from a failing conservation treatment. As well as some documents in perfect condition. This was really well intended. Over 50 members of staff came to the display on a Monday of all days, when the general population of TNA is very low. I asked the visitors to the display to think about what mental, emotional, or physical response the documents generated in them. Some visitors were confused by what I was asking. Some got it but struggled with it, and others felt an instant revulsion at having to handle various documents. I even had one person come up to me and say that they'd always felt slightly off handling some things, and that the display had helped them articulate why, which was really encouraging and really pleasing. I then put out a questionnaire asking people to express their thoughts and about the experience and how we could go about mitigating the experience. All of this led to the creation of my toolkit. The toolkit is the final outcome of the fellowship. It's split into 3 sections. One is a brief introduction to neurodiversity aimed at managers, defining what it is, how it works, and what some of the more common conditions are, and how the symptoms of those conditions might affect someone working in a repository space. The second part is a checklist for managers to be used when onboarding new starters, and a checklist of environmental conditions within existing repository space, or things to think about when setting up a new one. These suggestions include employee-specific considerations like providing fleeces, ear defenders to new starters, as well as broader environmental suggestions like recommending which temperature of light bulb would be the most comfortable. The final part is a guide to dyslexia-friendly signage. This takes the basics of online accessibility around fonts and images and applies it to the principles of physical signage. Working with colleagues at TNA who have produced guidance for our website, I've provided a list of various suggested typefaces and text sizes that would work best for dyslexic and dysgraphic users. The toolkit should be published on the TNA website before the end of the financial year, and I'm hoping to get it embedded into the standard working practice of document services soon. It has also been extensively checked and looked at by internal and external people to ensure that they work for both archives and libraries, and that I hadn't missed any possible adjustments. I'd like to take a second to thank Vicky Glukowski-Broad, Diverse History Specialist and the Chair of the TNA Neurodiversity Network, as well as Anne-Marie Foster of Robert Gordon University and Charlotte Dormer of Reading University Library for their inputs. So what did I learn from all of this? I think my biggest takeaway is that neurodivergent people do not need huge sweeping statements to make their lives easier and to improve access. The checklists show how small changes like offering ear defenders and changing lights so they are warmer makes a huge difference to a person's well-being. Sometimes the simplest answers are the right ones. I've seen time and time again through this process that the act of starting a dialogue and establishing what your individual workers' needs are makes a huge difference. I hope that by providing the tools to managers who might not feel comfortable starting these conversations, perhaps due to a lack of prior knowledge about neurodiversity, that we can start to make these environments a welcoming place for everybody that works in them. Thank you. That's me. Done.
Thank you so much, Tom. I was busy scribbling away, but your toolkit sounds fantastic, and I'll be really excited to have a look at that when it's available. Right, so we're into the discussion section of this afternoon's event. So I'm going to invite our speakers, if they are happy, to put their cameras back on. And we have had quite a few questions come in, so thank you so much for those of you that have been asking questions. So I'm going to dive in. Just coming back round then to Helen and Maria talking to us about Durham. We have a question that's about your snug. What was the snug before it became the snug? Where did the space come from? We're exploring where to put something similar.
So the snug is an area adjacent to our help and information desk, although discrete from it as well. It used to house the short loan collection, as well as books awaiting collection, books that had been reserved. Not long after I started, we had the whole break through COVID. And when we came back over COVID, we re-looked at the stats, and the short loan usage had dropped a lot. We'd invested heavily in ebooks over that period. So we basically raised the question, did we still need a short loan collection? Quickly decided we didn't, moved out the remainder of the stock and commandeered the space to do something different with. Our reservations have also dropped, so we've been able to reduce the amount of space that was given over to those. And this summer, since we've had new self-service machines put in, we've managed to get rid of a bit of equipment within that space as well. So we've made it even bigger, which is very exciting. So yes, it was just recognising something we no longer needed, and we could reprioritise the space for something else. And it gave us a really good opportunity to try something new, which I've been delighted about.
Thank you, Maria. There's quite a few questions for Sophie, and some of them are around practical areas. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, Sophie, but please feel free to chip in, other panelists, if you've got thoughts. The first one's around the kitchen. So you said that you put in a kitchen. How do you keep that tidy? Do you have a risk assessment? Does it work?
Yes. So yes, it does work. Keeping it tidy, I would say my piece of advice there is to engage with your cleaning team, your FM team, whatever it is, before you install the kitchen. So they were very much involved in the design of the kitchen areas. So we knew what would and wouldn't work for them, in terms of everything from colour to the fact that we don't actually have a sink in them. So we have hot water, cold water, drainage, microwaves, but we don't have a sink because sinks get left overnight and blocked and cause floods. So yeah, we have you know, the wipe down walls behind, not painted walls, all of those sorts of things. I know it's really dull to some people, but actually, so that's really important, engaging those partnerships beforehand. But yeah, but still tone down your colours. Sorry, there was another question. Risk assessments. Yes, there's a full risk assessment on it. It's hot water, so we have a sign up for the hot water. There's microwaves, they come with safety signs. You do your risk assessment. I mean, it's what it is.
Yeah, this sounds very familiar. Thank you, Sophie. There's a couple of questions about lighting. So I think all of you have talked about neurodiversity and the impact that lighting can have. Does anybody have anything to share about how you might have approached lighting? Particularly, we're encouraged to use LED lights. So someone in the chat has said that they're asked to do that, but actually we get negative feedback. Does anyone crack the lighting?
I wouldn't say we've cracked it, but one win that we did get this summer, because we were having some LED lighting and changes put in place around our help and information desk and the snug, what we were able to negotiate was having more zones to it. So whereas it used to be the whole thing on or off, we've now managed to get 3 different zones in the snug and 2 different zones at the help and information desk. So it is giving staff some element of control, and it gives students radically some element of control as well. So we've put the light switches in their area as well. Definitely not cracked it everywhere. There is that really hard balance between the legal limit of lighting that you are supposed to provide in task and work areas versus what sometimes personal preferences for all kind of reasons are. So
it's been a real challenge. It's one of the areas on our sensory map that was one of the sensory foci that we focused on, and obviously there's a limit to what we can do with the light in certain areas because of the health and safety remits. What we have put on the maps is where they're in areas of natural light, so at least during the day students can find spaces that might be more for their liking.
And from my point of view, lighting is nowhere near cracked at TNA. Just it's a mess and very inconsistent. My first target is just to get it consistent. Just to get one temperature of color of light would be a good first step. Preferably something warmer rather than colder. But lights have up until now been bought based on cost rather than the benefit of the workers in the space, because the documents come first, essentially, which is right, but at the same time we need a better balance than we have. So it's definitely something I want to work with our facilities team on, but we're a very, very long way from it at the moment.
Yeah, we've just had an entire lighting refresh in the larger of the 2 libraries, not led by library, actually led by our estates. They're rolling out across the entire estate. That is installing LED. I would say I'd agree that in some of our areas we've been able to manage some controllable lighting within certain rooms. But you obviously do have to stay within the legal limits. That's, you know, it's a health and safety requirement. We have to do it. Something I have learnt though, and actually we've learnt this much more in staff spaces than in student spaces, is really look at what you've got on the walls. We were having an awful lot of issues with some of our neurodiverse staff in the office and lighting. And when they came in and actually had a look at it, we had too much grey in the room, in the office. We hadn't paid enough attention to our own environment. So yeah, I would really think about that. So the light wasn't bouncing around properly.
Yes, that's a good point. Thank you. That was some good ideas there. Thank you. This is a question for Sophie. You mentioned that in St Luke's Library you doubled capacity. Did you have to lose anything as a result? How did you manage this?
Yeah. So luckily or unluckily, I don't quite know which this is, St Luke's Library hadn't had a lot of weeding done for quite a long time. So how long before? About 6 months before, we ran the figures. We looked at how often things had been used and borrowed. We went out to faculty, spoke to academics, everybody was engaged with, and the actual size of the physical collection on site was halved. So that's how we did it. Much of that is still available on a fetch and carry. But yeah, at the actual collection that's within that library was halved. That's how we did it.
Thank you. Question for Helen. Was it only ear defenders that were purchased for staff, or did you purchase extra other aids like overlays, etc.?
I think this is a Maria question, so I'm going to let her jump
Very
in.
happy to ask Maria, please.
It was primarily the ear defenders. Yeah, there is absolutely more that we could purchase. I think we put out fidget toys as well, sort of things that we had available, but yeah.
Thank you. There seems to be a bit of a theme about trying to reflect what we're doing for our students with our staff, which is just good to see coming through. Back to you, Sophie. So this question says, do other services in the university often take up your extra help desk space? How do you organise and promote that?
Yep. So yes is the answer to that. We have 2 or 3 services that really are interested and involved, one that use it every week throughout the year, and then others that dip in and out. Constant engagement. To be honest, I reach out to other service leads and say that this is something that they could use. I promote it in every meeting I'm in. It goes everywhere I can think of in terms of sort of behind the scenes, not student facing, obviously, but anything staff. So that's how I promote it. And yes, there is a good uptake for it. Our digital hub team is the team that have used the one at St. Luke's. They use that 3 days a week, every week of the year. Their engagement, their inquiries have shot up. I don't have the figures to hand, but I know I could get them for anyone interested.
Thank you. It's an interesting prospect. We've also got a gap in our help desk, so I was listening to that carefully. This is a question for Helen and Maria about your chat with us sessions. Could you tell us how well attended those are?
We usually get at least about 10 students coming down and having the conversation. Some might just literally pop and get a cup of tea and say hello and go away. Most stay and have that conversation. So it's that balance of having enough that feels worthwhile, not so much that we're not able to deal with it, which is great, but it definitely feels worthwhile doing it. I will pop a picture in the chat because they're actually running one at the moment, and it's our festive one, so I have a member of staff in his full festive get-up, so I'll pop that in the chat in a moment. But yeah, the students don't always just talk to us about the library, they speak to us as people. So as I said earlier, it is that thing about just presenting a very human side to the library and to the staff.
Thank you. So I've got a question for Tom. It's quite a big question. You were talking to us about your project and the things that you'd thought about investigating, and you talked a little bit about line management and culture. What do you think might be required to do a review of management culture?
Oh, that's huge.
Yeah, sorry.
I think you'd need to establish what the culture is and what it should be, and how you can pull those 2 things closer together. There's also a difference between how managers think they're managing and the actual experience of being managed by members of staff. So I think you'd need to either survey or interview, or both, neurodivergent members of staff to find out how they perceive themselves as having been treated. And you need to do the same for line managers and senior management to establish what is going on. And then I think you'd need to bring that all together and compare it with what best practice is. And that is an enormous undertaking, and a very complex one. But I think for the person who takes it on, I think it'll be a very worthwhile one. and a very important one. The main problem, I think, is, at least from a civil service point of view, is the inflexibility of some management cultures, and the fact that you're swimming against 50 to 100 years of embedded practice, and that's going to take even if you published a paper that says this needs to change and this is how we do it, changing that embedded culture is going to take forever. And it's just that adds an even deeper level of complexity. Yeah. Sorry
Thank
to
you.
I don't know.
Well, it was putting me a bit in mind of the work that you were talking to us about, Helen, and using the Athena Swan surveying methodology.
Yeah, and I think what we were trying to do to change culture, and this was culture across the department at all levels, was sort of normalise that conversation. It's very easy to not hear things when you don't start to have conversations. And one of the topics that did bubble up through the staff cultural survey was a really interesting one, and not wanting to talk about any specifics because it was all confidential, but there was a perception that something existed, and the reality was a slightly different lens on that. So it started to allow us as a group to have those conversations, and it made management aware of things that the staff felt very passionately about that hadn't filtered through. So what the working group has started, and having that regularity of the working group, is normalizing those conversations, making sure that the management structures are connected to the staff base and that we're having those opportunities. And that's why we're going to revisit the cultural survey on a regular basis, so we can benchmark this, we can track things, and we can keep coming back to it, learning from that, and then action can be taken through the working group.
Very interesting. I hope that you'll come back and talk to us again in a couple of years. Tell us how it's going. So I've got a question for Sophie. Could you tell us a bit more about the Library Champions project you did? What were the aims and how did you recruit?
Yeah, sure. So the Library Champions project that resulted in the coloured overlays and the fidget toys and everything that we did a couple of years ago, recruitment is just a form that goes out in a student newsletter. If I'm honest, we didn't get much response to that one, but the ones that we did came back, and then the students that get selected to be library champions at that point got to choose what they wanted to look into in terms of library spaces. So they normally come with a bit of an idea. We have actually this year changed library champions. So just say that we went out for recruitment for this year's library champions in June last year, and we did the training through the summer online. There wasn't a lot of training, but we did a bit of UX training online, and then we had one session in person when they came back in September. That recruitment has been much larger. So we were getting about 6 or 7 students interested in becoming library champions. This year we had 35, and I've taken them all. And I'm not going to lie, some of them have disappeared on me, and that's fine. The other difference we did this year was we set a brief. So I wrote, I say we because I work very closely with my opposite number in Penryn, because we have a shared campus in Penryn. So between us, we wrote 3 briefs. One of the ones that I wrote was on neurodiversity in library spaces, and students were asked to opt into their preferred brief and say which one they'd prefer to work on. So that we have changed it slightly this year.
Sounds absolutely fantastic. I'd be delighted to get that level of engagement. Does it make a lot of work for you? I do find that it's a time sink.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of work. But I think it's really important to give that student voice. Yeah. And it will genuinely drive next year. And it's also really important because UX work and giving back reports. So we've actually said that they have to give a presentation back to us this year. you know, that's real life employability skills. You know, they can actually put that on a CV when they leave us. It's important that they gain those skills while they're with us.
Absolutely. Thank you. Another question for you, I believe. The question is, I would be interested to hear more about the plans for integrating heritage collections within the library, if at all possible.
Yeah, no, I'd like to hear more about that too. So that is on my list. It's definitely on my objectives for the next 12 months. It's something that myself and the head of Heritage Collections here, Caroline Walter, have been talking about for some time. I think it's, I think about it in quite a visual way, as in I want to see it in our physical spaces, and how do we do that, but also how do we highlight in our digital spaces. So that's what's coming next for me. And if I'm honest, I don't quite know what that looks like yet. At the moment, we've got some display cases, and we have student curated displays that go in them, and staff curated displays that go in them, and they change termly, and that's great. But where do we go beyond that? Is my next question. So quite happy to come back and talk about it another time, but I don't know yet, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
And if anyone knows how they've done it, let me know. I'm really interested to hear.
So I've got a question which I think any of you might wish to talk a little bit about. Do you have special fund or budget allocated to collection acquisitions that cover EDI resources? If so, what percentage? So this is about your collections acquisitions budgets and how much is dedicated towards EDI resources.
I don't mind going first. We don't have a specific allocation or percentage allocation, but we do absolutely spend resources specifically in this area. So, for example, one initiative that we have is called Liberate My Library, where students, staff, anybody can put in requests for resources that don't have to be academic related or directly related to their studies, but can embrace any aspect of EDI. Again, we wouldn't necessarily purchase everything, but we would purchase a lot from that within it. So I couldn't, I mean, I could tell you how much we spent over the last year, but we wouldn't allocate that in advance. We're in a relatively fortunate position with our resources budget at the moment, where we're able to put everything basically together and work through it over the year.
Anybody got any other thoughts about funds? Sophie?
Yeah, I would say that we consciously know that we are allocating money to our wellbeing collections and our EDI collections. But again, we don't put a percentage on it. So yeah, and sometimes things are suggested to us through the years. So the Chinese fiction collection that we've got, that came up last year. We weren't expecting that. So sometimes things come at you, and you have to be a little bit flexible if you can be. Yeah, it's not going to be a massive percentage though. The percentage is going to be quite small that's specifically allocated to that, which is why I think it's important to really have that consideration in all of your decision making.
Thank you. Do you have embedded EDI in reading lists? So is there anything that you specifically kind of do for your reading list provision? I guess I'm looking at Maria and Sophie a little bit again.
So in terms of the academic reading lists that are put together, I would say there isn't anything that is prescribed or checked or monitored around that. You would hope that it would be embedded, and we did quite a big piece of work over the last 18 months around decolonising your reading lists, so it would kind of all link with that kind of conversation and the challenges that we put in through that. And one of the outcomes from that piece of work was we put in a toolkit to support academics in decolonising their reading lists and to encourage them to actively think and challenge the content of their reading list, but I would say there is no monitoring or no checks at the moment on how that is from a central position. It's down to the different faculties to manage. We produce our own reading lists, which are obviously not linked to modules, but we bring together reading lists about wellbeing resources, or reading lists that bring together resources for Black History Month, and other, LGBTQ and other aspects. We also subscribe to resources such as Libby to promote reading and wellbeing and fiction and other collections as well.
Yeah, I was going to just talk about, we're a digital first library, but that doesn't sort of, it's not a hard full stop on that. There are cases where we will look at other versions of resource as required. And also we have a member of the team who will do appointments to talk people through the different EDI capabilities of different platforms, how to put a digital screen across your reader, how to use audio, all of those sorts of things. So we actively try and encourage the use of those technologies. We have also recently, it feels recent, but it's actually been about 2 years in the making, because it's been quite a slow process. But we have agreed now, we have an agreement across the university that no student will be asked to buy a textbook in any course. So so it's quite a large undertaking. So we will supply, so if there is a physical book required, the library will provide it. And that's been quite a huge thing in terms of inclusion and equality, because obviously for some students that was a real major concern, and that's been massive.